Pontiac GTO, three letters that defined an entire era of American automotive history. The car that started the muscle car wars. The car that made John DeLorean famous. The car that teenagers in 1964 plastered on their bedroom walls and saved up for with paper route money. By 1974, it was gone. Killed by insurance premiums, strangled by emissions regulations, finished off by the oil crisis that ended the golden age of American horsepower. For 30 years, the GTO nameplate sat in the archives, and then, in 2004, it came back. But here's what almost nobody knew then, and what almost nobody remembers now. The 2004 Pontiac GTO wasn't built in Michigan. It wasn't born in a GM design studio in Detroit. It was built in South Australia by a company called Holden, by a design team that sketched it out on Sunday afternoons without management's permission, and it was wearing Pontiac badges that most Americans at the time, and most car fans today, couldn't connect to the car underneath. This is the story of one of the most audacious badge engineering moves in American automotive history. A Corvette engine, an Australian body, a legendary American name, and only 40,800 of them ever sold. Stick with me, because this car deserves a much longer story than it ever got. The name that wouldn't die. GTO history. Let's set the stage properly, because to understand why the 2004 GTO exists and why it matters, you have to understand what the GTO's legacy actually meant in America. It's 1964. Three Pontiac engineers, led by the young and ambitious John DeLorean, essentially break GM's own rules. The company had a corporate policy against putting engines larger than 330 cubic inches in mid-size cars. DeLorean didn't care. He dropped a 389 cubic inch V8 into a Pontiac Le Mans, gave it a special trim package, and called it the GTO. Named after Ferrari's racing legend, the Gran Turismo Omologato. GM expected 5,000 sales. They got 32,000. By 1966, they were selling 97,000 GTOs a year. By 1969, the car had spawned the GTO Judge, one of the most recognizable muscle cars ever produced. The GTO had become synonymous with American performance. Every car company in the country was trying to compete with it. The Chevelle SS, the Cuda, the Charger, the Mustang, all of them were, in some way, chasing what Pontiac had started. Then came the reckoning. Federal emission standards began tightening. Horsepower ratings started dropping. Insurance companies began classifying high-performance cars as premium risks and charging accordingly. The muscle car's business model was collapsing from multiple directions simultaneously. By 1973, the year of the Arab oil embargo, the conversation had completely changed. Nobody was talking about quarter-mile times anymore. They were talking about gas prices and fuel economy. The 1974 GTO was the last one standing, and by then, it barely resembled its ancestors. Bloated, underpowered, and by most accounts, subjectively ugly, it was a shadow of what the GTO had been at its peak. The nameplate went dormant, and for 30 years, that's where it stayed. The GTO became legend precisely because it was gone. It exists today in the collective memory of the 40 to 65 generation as the car that defined what American performance meant before the government and the insurance industry took it away. That emotional weight, that nostalgia, is exactly what Bob Lutz was counting on when he decided to bring it back. The story from down under, the Holden Monaro. To understand where the 2004 GTO actually came from, we need to travel about 9,500 miles from Detroit to Australia. While American manufacturers were fighting the GTO wars in the 1960s, Australia had its own version of the same battle happening. The domestic auto industry was divided into two passionate camps: Holden, which was a General Motors subsidiary, and Ford. The rivalry between them was as intense as anything happening in the American muscle car market. It was a cultural war, not just a commercial competition. On the Holden side, The most globally recognizable name in Australian muscle car history is the Monaro. Launched in 1968, the same year as the Dodge Charger's iconic second generation, the Monaro was the crowning achievement of a Detroit-trained American designer named John Chanella, working on assignment in Australia. With direct oversight from a GM-trained designer, it was only natural that the Monaro carried Coke bottle curves and American proportions. You could option the flagship HT Monaro GTS 350 with a 350 cubic inch Chevy small block V8 and a 4 on the floor. On the other side of the planet, this was a genuine global-level sports car. The Monaro went through generations, grew larger, and eventually went dormant after 1979. 25 years passed. Then, in the late 1990s, a native Australian named Mike Simcoe, who would eventually become GM's Vice President of Global Design, quietly started a resurrection project. And I mean quietly. According to Holden designer Peter Hughes, who worked under Simcoe during this period, the new Monaro was designed on Sundays, in the studio, on the team's own time, without management's permission. Hughes described it in an interview with Which Car magazine. That project was done on Sundays, in my own time, in the studio with some other guys. It was never designed as a show car. It was a rolling concept car. The budget for the initial prototype, the car that would eventually become the GTO, was $300,000. Approved by Simcoe himself, without formal corporate authorization. 22 months later, General Motors officially approved the project for production. The new Monaro debuted as a concept at the 1998 Australian International Motor Show. The crowd reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Holden entered production in 2001. The choice of power plants: a supercharged Buick-based 3.8-liter V6 or an LS1 V8. Confirmed this was a serious performance machine, not a styling exercise. And that's when the phone rang from Detroit. Bob Lutz was calling. Because what happened next was one of the most unexpected badge engineering stories in all of American automotive history. Bob Lutz's gamble. The GTO returns. The name Bob Lutz means something specific in the automotive world. He's the executive who pushed GM to build the Pontiac Solstice. He's the executive who championed the Chevrolet Volt. He's the man who believed, against considerable internal resistance, that American manufacturers could compete with BMW, Mercedes, and Audi on product quality and driver appeal. In the early 2000s, Lutz was GM's North American chairman, and he had a very specific vision for what Pontiac should be. Not a mass-market brand, not a fleet vehicle supplier, a genuine performance brand, focused, athletic, with the kind of driving character that the German manufacturers had turned into their business model. To revive the GTO nameplate, Pontiac had shown a concept at the 1999 Detroit Auto Show. It looked inspired by the late 1960s original, retro, emotionally resonant, the kind of thing that makes a crowd go quiet before erupting in applause. But it had no engine. It was a styling exercise, not a production plan. Lutz needed a real car, on a real timeline, at a real price point. Then he drove a Holden Commodore SS V8 sedan at an international press event, and reportedly loved it. The decision was straightforward. Take the V2 series Holden Monaro, apply Pontiac badges and an exclusive body kit, make the minimum modifications required for American safety compliance, and resurrect the GTO nameplate. Cars were assembled at Holden's plant in Elizabeth, South Australia. The only meaningful mechanical differences between the GTO and the Australian Monaro were the small changes required by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA. The engine was unchanged. The basic structure was unchanged. The driving character was unchanged. Under the hood, the 5.7-liter LS1 V8, the same engine that powered the C5 Corvette, the same engine that went into the fourth-generation Camaro SS, a high-revving, sonorous V8 that American enthusiasts had grown to love through those more famous applications. Horsepower, 350. In the base 2004 model, 0 to 60, 5.3 seconds with the 6-speed manual, 5.4 with the 4-speed automatic. Base MSRP, $32,495. And it immediately appeared in movies and video games. Herbie, fully loaded in 2005. The Need for Speed series, the Test Drive series, the Forza franchise. For a generation of late millennials and early Gen Z buyers, the 2004 to 2006 GTO was a poster car, a dream machine, a Need for Speed car wearing a legendary American name. And yet, it almost completely disappeared from the cultural conversation within a decade of its cancellation. And the story of why is genuinely fascinating. The 2005 upgrade. More power, still not enough. For 2005, Pontiac made a move that should have changed the conversation around the GTO entirely. They replaced the 5.7-liter LS1 with the 6.0-liter LS2, the same engine that powered the base C6 Corvette, the same unit that went into the Cadillac CTS-V, a car that Car and Driver was calling the best performance sedan in the world at the time. Output, 400 horsepower, 0 to 60, 4.8 seconds in real-world testing. Let's put that in context. An Aston Martin V8 Vantage, the British Grand Touring car that was selling for twice the GTO's price, ran to 60 in approximately 4.9 seconds. A Jaguar XK8 took 5.2 seconds. The new GTO was keeping pace with cars that cost $60,000 and above, for a base price of $32,495. Pontiac also redesigned the front fascia for 2005, a more aggressive look that addressed one of the most common criticisms of the 2004 model. The hood scoops were functional, the stance was athletic. The car looked like a performance machine in a way the original front end hadn't quite communicated. And here's where the comparison to Bob Lutz's European ambitions gets genuinely interesting. The BMW E46 M3, the car that Lutz openly cited as his benchmark, made 333 horsepower and ran to 60 in about 4.8 seconds, which means a 2005 GTO at 400 horsepower was essentially performance equivalent to the M3 in straight-line terms, for $30,000 less. Where the M3 had the advantage was in weight, lighter by several hundred pounds, and in that high-revving, emotionally involving straight-six engine character. The E46 M3 felt like a precision instrument. The GTO felt like something more relaxed, more grand touring in its approach. The kind of car you could drive 500 miles without feeling like you'd been through a workout. In some ways, the better European comparison was the Mercedes CLK 500 or the Infiniti G35 Coupe, a comfortable, quick, genuinely capable coupe with a stonking V8 and a price point that made its German competitors look extravagant. The 2005 to 2006 GTO was an exceptional car, objectively, by any performance metric that mattered. Why it failed? The badge problem. So if the 2004 to 2006 Pontiac GTO was this good, this fast, this capable, this reasonably priced, why did it fail? The answer is a combination of factors that, taken individually, each seem manageable. Combined, they were fatal. The first problem was styling. This is the one that almost every review from the era mentioned, and the one that the car's owners, many of whom still love their GTOs, acknowledge with some reluctance. The 2004 GTO looked like a slightly aggressive Pontiac Grand Am, or, as one buyer memorably described it in a comment that went viral among GTO fans, a bloated Cavalier. The great GTOs of the 1960s and early 1970s had visual presence. The flying buttress roofline, the aggressive hood, the Judge graphics. They announced themselves from across a parking lot. The 2004 version was clean, sophisticated, and by most European standards beautifully proportioned. But it didn't look like a GTO. It looked like what it was, a well-executed Australian muscle coupe wearing borrowed badges. The American buying public in 2004 was making comparisons. The retro-styled Ford Mustang GT was about to launch. the S197 generation with its explicit visual references to the 1960s original. A Dodge Charger was coming back with clear visual DNA from the most iconic Charger generation. Both of those cars were wearing their heritage on their fenders. The GTO was not. The second problem was the marketing. Pontiac's advertising team never quite figured out what story to tell. Was this a muscle car? A grand tourer? A budget European alternative? The messaging was inconsistent, and that inconsistency allowed the car to fall between categories without clearly owning any of them. The third problem, which nobody at GM could have anticipated when the project began, was the competitive timing. The S197 Mustang GT arrived in 2005 with retro styling, a strong V8 option, and the full weight of Ford's performance heritage behind it, at a lower price point. The GTO was competing against an icon that had just been visually reinvented, and it was doing so while looking like nothing in particular. Total sales from 2004 to 2006, just over 40,800 units. BMW reportedly sold that many E46 M3s in North America alone before the model ended in 2006. With global sales, they essentially doubled that number. Lutz had intended to bring a sixth-generation GTO to production. A clay mock-up was actually formed before the program was canceled. But when Pontiac was discontinued entirely in 2009, during GM's bankruptcy restructuring, the GTO project disappeared along with it, and the 2004 to 2006 GTO quietly faded from the conversation. The collector opportunity. What they're worth now. And this is where the story becomes genuinely interesting for anyone watching the classic car market. The 2004 to 2006 Pontiac GTO is currently in that perfect window of collector value where the price has bottomed out and the upward trajectory has begun, but hasn't yet become common knowledge. For context, in 2010, these cars were selling for $12,000 to $15,000, barely above average used car prices. People who understood what they were getting, a Corvette engine, a 6-speed manual, genuine grand touring performance, were quietly buying them. Today, clean examples with low mileage are trading between $20,000 and $35,000. 6-speed manuals command a premium. The 400-horsepower LS2 cars from 2005 to 2006 are drawing more attention than the 350-horsepower 2004 models. And the small number of enthusiasts who bought these cars new and kept them with original paint and original documentation are sitting on vehicles that are beginning to attract serious collector attention. One commenter on the article that inspired this video put it perfectly. He bought his 2006 GTO in 2013 with 10,000 miles on the clock for $22,000. Today, with under 50,000 miles, it's worth considerably more. And the ceiling on these cars hasn't been established yet. Here's what makes the 2004 to 2006 GTO a particularly interesting collector proposition. The LS engine family, specifically the LS1 and LS2, is one of the most respected performance V8s ever produced. Parts are abundant. Tuning knowledge is deep and accessible. These engines are bulletproof with basic maintenance and respond beautifully to modifications if a buyer wants to take them that direction. The Australian Holden Monaro connection adds a layer of automotive history that makes these cars uniquely interesting to anyone who understands it. You're not just buying a Pontiac. You're buying a car that carries the legacy of two parallel muscle car traditions, American and Australian, in a single package. And the GTO nameplate itself carries emotional weight that no amount of indifferent styling can entirely neutralize. These are cars that will get attention at shows, generate conversation, and connect their owners to a history that spans continents and decades. 40,800 cars, built in South Australia, shipped across the Pacific, wearing a name that the golden age of American horsepower made immortal. The 2004 to 2006 Pontiac GTO was the right car at the wrong moment. Arrived when the Mustang was about to launch its most successful retro reinvention, carrying styling that didn't tell its own story loudly enough, and discontinued before Lutz's larger Pontiac vision could take shape. But underneath all of that, a Corvette engine, a 6-speed gearbox, grand touring capability that matched cars costing twice as much, and a story that connects Detroit to South Australia in ways that still feel surprising, even knowing how it happened. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you know about the GTO's Australian connection? And in your opinion, does the 2004 to 2006 GTO deserve its place in the Muscle Car Hall of Fame? Or is it forever disqualified for the badge engineering that created it? Tell me in the comments. We read every single one. If this story surprised you, hit the like button. And subscribe for American automotive history that most channels never bother to tell. See you next time.